Hunting for Insiders with Network Deception, presented by Corelight and Traced. I'm John Gamble, Director of Product Marketing, and I'm joined today by Matt, founder of Traced. Matt, perhaps you could give the audience a bit about your background.
So good afternoon, everyone. We're happy to be here and glad you're taking the time to listen to this webinar. Before we jump into it, my name is Matt Hosberg, founder of Trace. I've got about 2 decades of kind of offensive and defensive security experience, working both in oil and gas, government, financial services, and for several startups. Happy to be here and look forward to showing what Trace and Corelight can do.
Excellent, thanks, Matt. And I run product marketing here at Corelight. I've been with Corelight for about 3 years, and I've spent my entire career in the broader security industry, representing a range of products across privacy, security technologies, and ID verification technologies as well. And today, I'm very excited to talk about a topic that we at Corelight haven't really talked about before, which is deceptive technologies and what you can do when you marry them with security monitoring of your network. So just quickly, the agenda. We'll talk about different deception techniques, the benefits of deception. Matt will walk us through that section. Then I'll pick up the thread and talk about network security monitoring and why that visibility is so important. And then the third part of this agenda is really the meat of today's presentation. Matt will be kind of taking those 2 concepts and putting them together in a demonstration of how you can actually set up a deceptive trap in your environment and monitor it on the network side and see exactly what's happening in terms of an insider threat. Then we'll quickly kind of outline the Traced and Corelight product offerings, and we'll close with a Q&A. And if you have questions, feel free to ask them at any point during the presentation via your questions tab. We'll be monitoring them, and we're going to save Q&A for the end. And lastly, a recording of today's presentation will be made available, so you can share this with colleagues who weren't able to join or watch it later if you have to drop off early. So with that, let's get started. Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about network deception.
Sounds good. Thanks, John, for that intro. So why network deception, right? This may be a term that's new to you. Maybe it's been around and you're rattling around in your brain for several years at this point. Regardless, I want to start with framing this a little bit, right? So when we talk about denial and deception, there's kind of this notion of this classical denial and deception, which over the years has been used in war, politics, marketing, and all the things like that. Now, one examples that I like to start with is basically one of the most famous uses of deception was back in World War II. Around the Normandy invasion, there was this operation called Operation Bodyguard. And it was essentially kind of this masterful deception plan with the purpose to mislead the German army and conceal the real location of this Allied invasion that was supposed to take place. The plan actually started with this quote unquote leak of top secret information that outlined these allied targets. And ironically though, if you know much about this operation, the documents that were quote unquote leaked were actually real. The thing about what helped the Allies was they actually put out fake information prior to this actual mishandling of information. And the German army didn't believe that those were real. They didn't think they were that lucky. And so by being fooled previously by this false information, the Allies leveraged some of this misinformation as a weapon to influence the Nazis' decision-making process, right? So fast forward a little bit closer to the actual invasion. They had they hired artists to create these blow-up tanks, which is what you're seeing at the top right. Essentially, blow-up planes, paratroopers, that all looked real from afar, right? So if you were doing any type of aerial reconnaissance, these things looked like the real deal. Now, obviously, if you're standing right next to them, you could tell that there's something not quite right. But basically, these decoys were leveraged to signal to the Germans that they were actually the Allies were going to be attacking from those suspected areas, right? And so this gave the Allies the upper hand at an already challenging invasion. If you ever spend any time over, I've actually walked the beaches of Normandy, and they are very long, very expansive. And so to be a soldier assaulting that beach is already a daunting task. So we needed every advantage. We needed to use every advantage. So with that said, it was a success. It was a very decisive invasion. Still cost a lot of manpower, unfortunately, but it was a very masterful level of deception at scale. More recently, in the 2016 election, we have kind of an example from the Internet Research Agency that used information to essentially influence public opinion, right? And that's pretty evident and well documented. And then the bottom kind of left right there, marketing, like what we're doing right here today. Sometimes you may have noticed something as advertised doesn't quite look what it should like, doesn't quite look the same as it does in reality, right? It's ironic, but it's true, right? I mean, that's just the quality maybe of something like that. So you see, deception isn't just about presenting a fake of something like a honeypot or a decoy, and we're going to talk about kind of what those mean. But it's really a larger plan that helps to influence the decision an adversary is making, right? So the idea, back to the case of D-Day, the Allies knew the Germans would conduct aerial reconnaissance to gather that intelligence. And so they used those decoys in conjunction with that to basically help inform what the Germans were looking for. All right, so as we kind of frame this more into our current state of affairs, right? We want to talk about, everyone knows MITRE, right? Everyone knows MITRE's enterprise framework. But actually what I want to spend a little time on today is the pre-attack framework. So this is essentially the framework that an adversary may use, and maybe not in order or anything like that, but these are the type of things that as an attacker you have to identify before you actually launch your attack. So for example, we have to define a priority, we have to select the target, and then during that whole phase, they might start branching out and looking for technical information, right? Conducting scanning of that organization and its systems. They might do some open source intelligence gathering around the personnel that are associated with that organization. They might try to figure out what other third parties and infrastructure is leveraged. And then identifying all of that, they start to work through maybe what those weaknesses are. Maybe it's a technical thing, maybe it's through personnel, and that's how they start to formulate that attack, right? And so the question I would pose, right, is what if we could actually, what if it was possible to detect this activity as early as possible, right, to learn about what the attacker is after and to inform our defenses, right? Wouldn't this help with prevention? Wouldn't this help to uncover those techniques and procedures and attackers leveraging against the organization? And my answer to that is absolutely, right? And if we focus on the latter and we wait for the attacks to actually manifest themselves in our organization, in my mind, in a lot of cases that might be too late, right? So if we think back to Operation Bodyguard, right, that fake information that was real, or that leaked fake information, but it was actually real, and they were in their early stages of planning, it actually changed their mind on where they would attack or even mass their troops, right? So that's very similar to this pre-attack. If we can inject that information to influence that decision-making process as early as possible, it can have some cascading effects and even allow us to maybe potentially redirect that attack earlier before it actually takes place. And so let's just take a quick pause right here to talk about what deception kind of means, right? So we all have this notion of like what a honeypot is. I would imagine most of the folks on this call understand what that is, right? And honeypots, in my mind, are essentially some type of computer system that is mimicking a real system. So it's like an emulation of a system to produce return certain results, to interact so that it can be interacted with. And what we kind of move into the next one on our honey nets, it's really just a collection of all those honeypots together. For today's scenario, we're actually going to walk through more of the honey tokens and the decoy systems. And so what's different about all that, right? Well, a honey token essentially is not a full computer system. It could be a value, could be a record in a database, it could be a file. And a decoy, right, could be an actual license operating system that's, if it wasn't purpose